I was betrayed in my own home. Not by a stranger, by the man I swore to love and my own sister, Claire. She utterly humiliated me and made me feel worthless. I was kicked out of my own house. I remember crying myself dry. But the biggest secret I kept for 10 years is this. She came back. She was utterly ruined on my doorstep, begging for help. But what I told her in the end, shut down everyone. But before we keep going, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. And hey, don't forget to drop a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps out a lot. The greatest betrayal of my life happened on a Tuesday. I remember the day because it was the 20th anniversary of the day I first met David, and I had left a bottle of his favorite vintage chilling in the cellar. I was 53 years old, a mother, and thought I had built a fortress of a life here in our beautiful Seattle home. A life that included my sister, Claire. She was 10 years younger, sleek, and often, frankly, arrogant. I loved her, or I thought I did. We were supposed to be inseparable, the way my own mother always wished we would be. But love, I learned that Tuesday, is often just an illusion wrapped around a secret waiting to explode. I'd come home early from the gallery where I taught part-time. I'd forgotten the keys and, as I fumbled with the spare in the lock, I heard a sound. Not a sound of joy, but a low, guttural laugh that I immediately recognized as David's, followed by Claire's breathy giggle. It wasn't the sound that chilled me. It was the familiarity of it, the way it had woven itself into the fabric of my home without my noticing. I pushed the door open, and the world fractured. They were in the living room, sprawled on the Italian leather sofa I'd spent 6 months tracking down. David, my husband for 20 years, and Claire, my baby sister, the girl I helped raise, were tangled together, their faces flushed with the ugly glee of illicit excitement. The wine I'd bought was open, half empty on the coffee table. For a moment, I didn't breathe. I didn't cry. I just stood there, a statue carved out of granite, watching the most important people in my life commit an act so vile it felt biblical. David saw me first. His face didn't register shock or shame. It registered annoyance, like I was an inconvenient mess he now had to clean up. "Grace," he muttered, pulling away slowly, as if the whole scene was merely a minor indiscretion. But it was Claire who delivered the killing blow. She didn't bother covering up. She just sat up, ran a hand through her perfectly highlighted hair, and smiled. That smug, beautiful, evil smile. "Oh, look who's home, David." "Just in time," Claire purred, leaning into the sofa. She turned her full attention to me, her eyes drilling into mine. "Honestly, Grace, this was overdue. You're just old and tired. David deserves more life. He deserves me." That single sentence, old and tired, was a dagger of pure humiliation. It referenced the image I'd seen in the mirror countless times, the slight crinkle around my eyes, the silver threads I refused to dye. It wasn't just a physical attack. It was a psychological dismantling of my entire identity as a wife and a woman. I found my voice a strangled rasp. "Get out. Both of you. Get out of my house." Claire just laughed, a cruel, ringing sound that echoed in the high ceilings. "Your house? Honey, you clearly haven't been paying attention to the paperwork. David and we've been planning this for months. I'm moving in. You are leaving." David finally stood up, pulling on his shirt. He didn't look at me, only at Claire. "Grace, don't make a scene. We'll send you a cashier's check for a few thousand to start over." It's over. It wasn't just my husband and my sister I lost. It was my home, my 20 years, my dignity. They literally stood there and watched me, a woman in her early 50s, gather my purse and keys. I was kicked out of the life I built, a life they were already preparing to step into seamlessly. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me, just a woman with a car and an empty heart. The last thing I heard as I slid into my old sedan was Claire's victorious laughter. I drove until the beautiful Seattle skyline disappeared into the rearview mirror, replaced by rain and anonymity. The tears finally came, hot and blinding, wetting my cheeks with the salt water of defeat. I pulled over, parked on a muddy shoulder somewhere north of Tacoma, and sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes felt like sand. Then something shifted. The utter exhaustion of the crying brought a strange clarity. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror, hollow, stained, ruined. I reached for my phone, smashed it against the dashboard, shattering the screen, cutting every cord to my past. I put the car in drive and looked one last time into the rearview mirror, not at the road, but at the reflection of the woman I was. That was the last tear I ever shed as a victim. I promised myself I would never look back. The old Plymouth rumbled for 3 days straight, fueled by gas station coffee and pure adrenaline. I ended up in a forgotten little town in Idaho, a place so small it felt like the perfect spot to disappear. I checked into a grubby motel room that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner. This was my sanctuary now, this pathetic little space where the bed sagged and the TV only got 3 channels. This was the depth of my Vergonha shame. I had gone from marble countertops and designer clothes to stained floral wallpaper and a shower that dripped constantly. I let myself cry again, but this time it was a cry of purgation, not despair. I was purging the memory of David's cold eyes and Claire's mocking smile. I sat on the edge of that miserable bed, tracing the lines of my palms, trying to find the woman I used to be. The woman who laughed easily and believed in lifelong vows. That woman was dead. I had been trodden so deeply, not just by a husband, but by the person who shared my blood and my childhood secrets. The double dose of treachery was venomous, seeping into my core. I remembered Claire's words, old and tired. That was the lie I had to kill. I wasn't tired, I was just misplaced. I had spent 2 decades curating a home and a life for other people. Now it was just me. I pulled out my wallet. David had been true to his word, in the most insulting way possible. A bank transfer for a measly $10,000, which he clearly thought would appease me. $10,000 for 20 years of my life. It was a joke, a final slap in the face. But a joke, I realized, can be the beginning of something else. I used to be an art teacher before I became Mrs. David Harrington, a role I'd accepted because David thought a gallery owner's wife should have a quiet, respectable hobby. But my real passion, the fire in my soul, was painting, not teaching, but creating. I had always dreamed of a gallery, not filled with other people's work, but with my own. It was a segredo I had buried deep under domesticity. I spent the next 3 days walking the town, feeling the chill of my solitude. Then I found it, an old, abandoned laundromat with grimy windows and a for rent sign. It was small, cheap, and utterly repulsive. Perfect. I signed the lease, bought cheap cans of white paint, and scrubbed the floors until my hands bled. I used $3,000 of David's blood money to buy canvases, brushes, and oil paints. I turned the back room, where the massive washing machines once sat, into a small sleeping area. The pain, the humiliation, the sheer, incandescent rage I felt. I poured it all onto the canvas. I didn't paint landscapes or portraits. I painted raw, chaotic emotion. Swirling blacks that represented David's emptiness, sharp reds that were Claire's cruelty, and a deep, lonely indigo that was the color of my soul. I painted until my body ached, until the floor was littered with crumpled rags and empty tubes. I hit a wall one evening. I was staring at a canvas that felt too dark, too ugly, and the old despair threatened to swallow me whole. I was broke, alone, and painting only my own misery. I almost packed it all in, ready to concede defeat to Claire. The bell above the front door jingled, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. An old woman stood in the doorway, bundled up in a thick cardigan, carrying a bag of groceries. She looked bewildered, having clearly mistaken my makeshift studio for something else. "Oh, excuse me, dear. I thought this was Mrs. Henderson's dry cleaning shop," she mumbled, turning to leave. "It's just an art studio now," I said, my voice husky from disuse. She paused, her eyes widening as they landed on the painting I was struggling with. A canvas named The Ejection, a swirling vortex of white-hot pain surrounding a solitary black figure. She walked slowly toward it, dropping her bag with a thud. She stood there for a long time, silent. Then her chin began to wobble. She reached out a wrinkled hand, not touching the paint, but hovering over it. "It looks exactly like the moment I lost my husband," she whispered, tears forming in her ancient eyes. "That pain, that loneliness. It's so real." She turned to me, her face wet. "How much, dear? I have to have it." I stammered, caught completely off guard. I haven't priced it." "Give me a number," she insisted, pulling a thick wad of cash from her pocket. "It's worth every penny to know someone else understands that depth of feeling." I told her a number, a ridiculous, inflated price that I pulled out of thin air. She counted the bills slowly, placed the money in my hand, and gently carried the canvas out the door. I stared at the cash in my palm. It wasn't about the money. It was the moment I realized my pain had currency. My sorrow was not worthless. It had value. It had power. That first small, insignificant sale was the first spark of my resurrection. I suddenly knew exactly what I was going to do. I had a secret weapon they never accounted for, the fire they tried to extinguish. Idaho was my crucible, but Savannah, Georgia, was my destiny. I didn't waste time looking back. David's paltry $10,000, combined with the small, steady stream of art sales I made over the next 6 months, gave me enough to trade the shabby Plymouth for a train ticket and a one-way trip east. But the real fuel for my rebirth was my grandmother's secret. My paternal grandmother, bless her silent, stern soul, had never trusted banks, and certainly not her son-in-law, David. Years ago, she had quietly transferred a modest but significant inheritance into a safe deposit box, accessible only by me, with explicit instructions not to touch it until I truly needed it. I now realized I had never needed it more. Claire and David had no idea this money existed. They only knew the joint accounts David had pillaged. The inheritance wasn't enough for a mansion, but it was perfect for a fresh start. Savannah, with its ancient moss-draped oaks and air of old-world elegance, felt like a world away from the cold, modern sterility of Seattle. It was a place where I could reinvent myself under a new name, my maiden name, Carter, and build an identity entirely separate from Mrs. David Harrington. I found an old, beautiful Federalist-style building on a quiet, historic square. It was rundown, dusty, and expensive, but it had large windows and high ceilings. It had character. I poured every penny of the inheritance into it, transforming the ground floor into the Carter Fine Art Gallery. I worked with a ruthless precision I hadn't known I possessed. The paint I had painted in Idaho now guided my aesthetic choices. I didn't want the gallery to be warm and welcoming. I wanted it to be elegant, exclusive, and cold, a reflection of the woman I had become. I traded the vibrant chaos of my personal pain for the polished sophistication of the market. I wasn't just selling art. I was selling success, distance, and a certain detached beauty. I learned the art of negotiation, the politics of the local art scene, and the careful selection of clients. I hosted invitation-only viewings. I cultivated an image of reserved, impeccable professionalism. At 54, I wasn't old and tired. I was mature and established. Claire's curse became my shield. My silver hair, which I now wore in an elegant bun, became a sign of authority. I realized that David and Claire had only valued my usefulness as a wife and sister. Now, people valued my judgment and my vision. The gallery quickly became a quiet success, specializing in contemporary Southern artists and the occasional European master. I lived upstairs in a modest but exquisitely furnished apartment, surrounded by the silence of my own making. I had built a new fortress, and this time, the walls were fortified against betrayal. I was content but not soft. The wound remained, scar tissue covering a deep cavity. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, the memory of David and Claire would surface, a low, poisonous hum. I hadn't checked on them. I had severed all ties. I had to assume they were thriving, that their great TRAI with Tildo had paid off, a thought that sometimes kept me awake. But the universe, I was learning, has a wicked sense of humor. One evening, I was finalizing the details for a major exhibition, closing up the gallery, when an email from an old, mutual acquaintance in Seattle popped up on my laptop. It wasn't meant for me. It was part of a chain forwarded by mistake, showing a snapshot of David and Claire on a gleaming new yacht in the Caribbean. Claire was wearing a ridiculously oversized sun hat, and David was holding an expensive cigar. They were smiling with the effortless smugness of the truly self-satisfied. A brief, intense wave of nausea hit me. They had won. They were living the life of luxury I had sacrificed for. The desire for vengeance, which I thought I had buried, flared up hot and sharp in my chest. It was a bitter reminder that while I had found peace, they still had the pleasure of my loss. I leaned against the mahogany counter, the beautiful, imported wood cold against my palm. I stared at the photograph, studying the excessive ostentation, the cheap, desperate need to show off. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It will catch up to them, I whispered to the empty room. It always does. I deleted the email, ensuring the only trace of their existence was the faint, cold ache in my heart. But the image of that boat, and that look of smug prosperity on Claire's face, stayed with me, a promise of a future reckoning I refused to chase, but secretly waited for. 10 years. A decade had passed since I was kicked out onto a lonely highway. The Carter Fine Art Gallery was now a pillar of the Savannah art community. My success was documented in trade magazines and local society pages. I lived in a gracious, three-story historic home overlooking the Vernon River, far grander than the Seattle house. I had everything I needed: financial independence, respect, and most importantly, peace. Yet, as I sat in my quiet sunroom, watching the light filter through the Spanish moss, I often thought about the strange arithmetic of prosperity. The wealth I accumulated didn't magically erase the vacuum left by broken trust. It simply provided the most exquisite insulation from future pain. I was no longer emotionally vulnerable. The only heart I had to guard was my own, and it had been hardened into something resembling tempered steel. I was meticulous about maintaining my emotional distance. I hadn't made deep, personal friends, just associates who respected my reserve. I was Grace Carter now, a woman who controlled her narrative. I indulged in the occasional distant surveillance of the past. It wasn't an obsession, more like checking a long-healed but prominent scar. Every 6 months or so, I'd create a dummy social media account and look up David and Claire. The picture I painted in my head of their life was perfect. The yacht, the constant holidays, the endless success. But the reality I saw on screen was beginning to crack. In the first few years, they were living high. New cars, extravagant parties, photos that screamed, "Look how happy we are." But as time wore on, the smiles seemed too brittle, the ostentation too desperate. The comments sections on their posts, which I devoured with clinical interest, spoke volumes. People noticed the shift, the aggressive political posts, the frequent public squabbles visible in comment wars, the increasingly frantic display of luxury that suggested they were compensating for something deeper. They had exchanged my quiet, substantial life for a loud, fragile performance. David's career, I knew, was volatile. He dealt in high-risk real estate, relying on charm and leverage, not solid ethics. I could see the signs of strain. Claire, meanwhile, seemed to have sunk into the role of the trophy wife. Her every post focused on material possessions, a frantic attempt to validate the choice she made that Tuesday afternoon. I always logged off feeling a quiet, cold sense of validation. Justice, I decided, wasn't about a cosmic lightning bolt. It was the slow, inevitable erosion of character. They had built their life on a rotten foundation, and I knew, with the cold certainty of an actuary, that the numbers would eventually turn against them. Then came the year of the Great Fall. I was in New York, closing a substantial deal with a major collector. I felt invincible, completely detached from the woman who had cried in a Tacoma motel room. As I was walking through Midtown, a massive digital billboard flashed the latest financial news. I stopped, not recognizing the names at first, but the photograph. I recognized the man's smug, fading face instantly. David Harrington. The headline was about a mid-level financial scandal, a bad investment, a series of defaulted loans, a spectacular collapse of a project he had leveraged to the hilt. The language was dry. Creditors now pursuing recovery of assets against Harrington and Associates. The words meant nothing to the world, but to me, they meant everything. The foundation had cracked. The ruin was setting in. I felt a sharp, intense jolt of satisfaction, quickly followed by a strange neutrality. It wasn't the raging vengeance I once craved. It was simply the settling of a 10-year-old account. I had moved on, built a life that transcended the entire mess. Their failure was a footnote in my success story. I ignored the urge to investigate further. It wasn't my problem. I had a dinner reservation to keep, a business to run. I continued walking, stepping over a puddle and dismissing the drama unfolding hundreds of miles away. But later that night, as I sat in my luxurious hotel room, the image of the digital billboard kept flashing in my mind. The secrets and lies they had woven were finally unraveling. I had predicted it, but prediction and reality are two different things. I knew, with a certainty that made the hair on my arms stand up, that the distance I had meticulously built between myself and them was about to be breached. Fate, it seemed, wasn't content to simply let them fail in Seattle. Fate was bringing them closer. The next day, after the New York trip, I returned to Savannah with a strange sense of anticipation. The news of David's financial collapse, while not directly involving me, felt like a distant earthquake whose tremors were finally reaching my carefully constructed life. I maintained my usual routine, the gallery, the quiet evenings, the cool elegance. But underneath, attention coiled tight. A week later, the call came. The caller ID was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Seattle. I almost ignored it, but my curiosity, that cold, analytical part of my brain, won. "Grace? Is that you?" "It's Mark," the voice on the other end said, tentative. Mark was the old acquaintance who had accidentally sent me the photo of the yacht all those years ago. He was a decent man, always slightly uncomfortable around David's aggressive greed. Mark, I'm surprised to hear from you. My voice was calm, utterly professional. Look, I wouldn't call, but, well, things are bad. I saw the news. David is gone. Gone. Vanished. Liquidated what he could, sold the yacht, cleaned out every accessible account, and disappeared. He left Claire with the entirety of the debt. I mean, the whole thing collapsed, the house, the businesses, everything. She's utterly ruined, Mark explained, his voice thick with a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. They lost the Seattle place. Your house, Grace. It was foreclosed on last month. A rush of cold air hit me. That house, the physical manifestation of my humiliation and loss, was gone. It felt like a cleansing fire. And Claire? I asked, my voice flat, betraying no emotion. She tried to stick it out, but the creditors were relentless. She couldn't sell the house fast enough because of the liens David slapped on everything. She had to declare bankruptcy. She lost everything. Every single piece of jewelry, every designer dress, every memory of the life she stole from you. It's all gone. She's selling what little furniture she has left, living out of a small storage unit. I closed my eyes. It was a perfect, delicious, poetic justice. David, the ultimate betrayer, had not only destroyed me, but had also destroyed the woman he betrayed me with. The predator had consumed his partner. That's terrible, Mark, I said, a little too evenly. Why are you calling me? Mark hesitated. Because I saw the way she looked, Grace. She's broken. She has no skills, no support system. Everyone in Seattle knows what she did to you. She's ostracized. She was literally sleeping in her car for a few days. I felt the conflict then, a sharp, uncomfortable tug. Part of me, the old Grace, felt a wave of familiar pity, that sisterly instinct. But the new Grace, the one forged in fire, was ice. She chose this. She said I was old and tired. Mark continued, dropping the final piece of news that made my heart hammer against my ribs. She couldn't stay in Washington. She was too humiliated. She mentioned she had an old friend in Georgia. I think she drove south a few weeks ago. Savannah, maybe? I didn't press her for details. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. Savannah. My city. The one place I thought was safe from the ghosts of the past. The universe wasn't content with just having her fail. It was forcing a confrontation. It was forcing a decision. Thank you for the call, Mark, I said, hanging up before he could press me further. I walked to the window, the moss-draped square of Savannah looking peaceful and indifferent. Claire was here. Ruined and desperate, she was somewhere in the periphery of my new life. I felt a profound internal debate. My old life had been a series of endless losses, a husband, a sister, a home. My new life had been a series of controlled victories. Now, the past had arrived on my doorstep, metaphorical though it was. What was I supposed to do? Extend a hand of forgiveness, or deliver the final, crushing blow? I stood there for an hour, formulating a plan, mapping out the confrontation that was now inevitable. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to run. I had built this empire from the ashes of her TRI with Tildo. She was going to see it. She was going to feel the full, cold weight of the destiny she chose for herself, and the prosperity she sacrificed for a cheap thrill. I didn't know when she would show up, but I knew she would. David was gone, she was alone, and I was the last lifeline, the despised older sister who had inexplicably found success. It was the only logical next move in her desperate scramble for survival. I smiled, a thin, mirthless curve of my lips. Let the game begin, Claire. I've been waiting 10 years to play. The next few days were agonizing, the silence of my elegant home screaming with expectation. I refused to let the tension show at the gallery. I was the picture of composure, but inside I was coiled, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or, more accurately, the other sister to appear. I was sipping my morning coffee in my sunroom, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, watching a heron land gracefully on the riverbank. It was a perfect, tranquil moment, the kind of moment I had worked 10 years to earn. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the gentle chime of a delivery service or the double tap of a collector. It was a persistent, desperate buzz, the sound of someone who had nowhere else to go. My heart didn't jump. It solidified. I put my coffee down, the china cup clicking softly on the glass table. I walked slowly to the foyer, my steps measured and deliberate. I looked through the peephole. It was Claire. I barely recognized her. The Claire I knew was a vibrant, arrogant flame, always impeccably dressed, her face radiating the confidence of someone who believed she deserved the world. The woman standing on my porch was a shadow. She was thin, drawn, and looked much older than 43. Her hair, once perfectly highlighted, was a drab, uneven brown, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing a faded, cheap jacket that looked like it had been slept in, and her eyes were wide, frantic, darting around my pristine porch. Her hands, once adorned with the heavy gold and diamond rings David had bought her, were bare and chapped. The arrogance was utterly gone, replaced by the sheer, naked fear of a person facing total ruin. I didn't open the door immediately. I just stood there, taking her in, letting the full weight of the 10 years settle between us. I was seeing the slow-motion car crash of her life, and it had been spectacular. Finally, I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the massive mahogany door open. I stood in the doorway, blocking her entrance, my expression carefully blank. I was dressed in a tailored silk robe, my hair perfectly coiffed, my manner radiating a chilling, untouchable prosperity. Claire's eyes traveled over me, from my expensive robe to the polished marble floor of the foyer, then finally up to my face. The recognition was instant, and it was brutal. She had clearly expected to find me, but seeing me in this place, in this state of elegant success, destroyed her remaining composure. Her eyes welled up. The sleek, beautiful Claire of a decade ago dissolved. She crumpled. She dropped to her knees right there on the porch, a supplicant on the cold stone. She didn't manage a coherent word, only a choking sob. Then she started to implore, beg, her voice cracking with the raw, unmistakable sound of desperation. Grace, oh Grace, please. I have nothing. I'm ruined. David, he left me with nothing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, please. I need help. I have nowhere to go, she stammered, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The tears were real, running down cheeks that were now too thin. I didn't move. I didn't reach out. I simply observed the scene, the absolute pinnacle of poetic justice, playing out on my own doorstep. The woman who had told me I was old and tired was literally kneeling before me, begging for the life she had once kicked out of her way. The moment stretched into a painful silence, broken only by Claire's desperate whimpers. I let her cry, letting the tears wash away the last vestige of her pride. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of warmth, a blade of ice against her flushed skin. Get up, Claire, I commanded, and the sound of my voice cut through her sobs. The last time you were at my door, you were expulsando, kicking out me. You were telling me I was old and tired. You were laughing at my humiliation. I took a slow, deliberate step back, opening the door just enough for her to stand, but still not inviting her in. Now, stop crying. I waited until she shakily pulled herself to her feet, her eyes red and puffy, fixed on me like a lost child. I looked at her, truly looked at the damage David had inflicted, and the damage she had inflicted upon herself. I need you to tell me clearly and truthfully, I said, my gaze unwavering, what you really want from me, and don't waste my time with lies. She swallowed hard, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, the full weight of my cold indifference finally hitting her. That was the last thing she ever expected. That after 10 years, I had nothing left for her but icy detachment. The sheer intensity of my coldness seemed to shock Claire more than her own ruin. She stood trembling on the threshold, the lush scent of my home, clean linen and fresh-cut flowers, a stark contrast to the despair clinging to her faded jacket. Come in, I finally said, stepping aside, but I made sure my tone conveyed no welcome, only a grim necessity. I led her not to the bright sunroom, but to the formal sitting room, a place of reserved, uncomfortable elegance. I sat on a velvet armchair. She sank tentatively onto the edge of a matching sofa, looking desperately small. Don't try to justify it, Claire. I don't want to hear about how David made you do it. You chose him. You chose to be a traitor, I stated, cutting off the apology that was already forming on her lips. Start with the present. What happened after David ran? She took a shaky breath and began her confession. She recounted the agonizing, drawn-out collapse of their life, the sudden, terrifying realization that David's investments were paper-thin, the creditors circling like vultures, the cold eviction from the very house she had helped steal. I tried, Grace. I tried to save it, she choked out, running a hand through her messy hair. But David, he had everything tied up in his name. When he went, he literally cleaned out the savings, leaving me with the debts, the lawsuits, and the humiliation. Did you really believe he loved you, Claire? Did you think he was going to marry you and be faithful when he was doing this to his wife of 20 years? I leaned forward slightly, forcing her eyes to meet mine. You knew what he was capable of. You saw it firsthand, didn't you? And you still thought you were the exception. She stared at the carpet, unable to hold my gaze. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I thought I was better than you, Grace. Stronger. I thought I could hold him, keep him in check. You remember telling me I was old and tired? I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you remember making me cry as I walked out that door? Do you remember standing in my living room, the one I decorated, and ordering me out? Of my own life. Claire broke down again, her body shaking with profound, gut-wrenching grief. Not just for her loss, but for the moral vacuum she had become. Yes, I remember. And I deserve this. I do. I have nightmares about it. Every time I had to sleep in my car, I saw your face, Grace, and I thought, this is what you deserve. I felt the first slight stirring of empathy, quickly suppressed. This wasn't about forgiveness yet. It was about ensuring the lesson was permanent. No, Claire. You don't deserve to be a refugee. You deserve to work for every single breath of clean air you take from now on. Suddenly, Claire lifted her head, her face pale but resolute. You don't know the worst of it, Grace. There's a Segredo secret you don't know. David didn't just leave me with debt. He betrayed you a second time, by using me. I raised an eyebrow, demanding she continue. That house, your old house, and all the liquid assets he had from selling your joint investments? A year before he left, he convinced you to sign a power of attorney for that property. He told me he was going to keep it safe from the market crash. Instead, when he finally filed for divorce from you, he transferred everything, the entire portfolio, the house ownership, to me. He told me it was my reward, our secure future. I frowned. And the house was foreclosed on. Exactly, because he had already set it up. He used my name to launder the last of his cash and move it offshore. He transferred the debt and the remaining property value to me, making me liable for all his bad debts. When he vanished, the creditors looked at the last person he gave money and assets to me. I never saw a penny of that money. He used my own greed and my own TRI with Tildo against me. I didn't just steal your husband, Grace. I was just another convenient shield for David. He double-crossed us both. The silence that followed was heavy with revelation. David hadn't just been a rat, he was a meticulous predator. Claire wasn't the victor, she was just the second casualty. I wasn't just betrayed, I was merely the first in a line of victims. I stood up, walking to the window. The coldness in my heart didn't melt, but it deepened, layered with a new, complex understanding of David's true malice. He had been calculating all along. I turned back to Claire, who sat waiting for my judgment. So, you didn't just lose my husband. You lost everything to my husband. That's almost beautiful, in its own sick way, Claire. I know it's too late for apologies, she whispered. But please, Grace, help me. I have nothing. I'll do anything. I smiled, a thin, chilling expression. Anything, Claire? Good. Because I'm about to give you an offer that will test your sincerity, and it won't involve a hug or a handout. I didn't offer Claire a hot meal. I didn't offer her a room in the guest wing. I offered her a contract, meticulously drafted by my attorney the next morning. You need to understand something, Claire, I said, sliding the document across the antique desk in my private office. I am not forgiving you. The damage you caused, the decade of humiliation I endured, doesn't simply vanish because your life imploded. This is not charity. This is a transaction, a structured opportunity for self-rehabilitation. Claire looked from the crisp paper to my unyielding face. She was ready to implore her again, but the steely focus in my eyes silenced her. Here is the deal, I continued, leaning back. You need two things, shelter and work. I will provide both, but on my terms. I have a small, perfectly adequate apartment above my secondary storage warehouse downtown. It's clean, safe, and it's mine. You will live there. It's rent-free for 6 months, if you abide by the terms of employment. Claire's eyes widened slightly. Shelter. It was more than she had now. Now the job, I said, tapping the desk. You will be an inventory assistant and cleaning staff at the Carter Fine Art Gallery. That is the cleaning lady, the janitor, the stockroom manager. You will handle the least glamorous, most repetitive, and most physically demanding tasks. Your salary will be minimum wage, no benefits, no overtime, until I deem you competent. Claire blanched. Cleaning? Grace, I was a vice president's wife. I helped David entertain clients. I managed a staff of 3 at home. You managed to TRHR your sister and lose everything to a con artist. I finished flatly. Your past credentials are irrelevant, Claire. You said you'd do anything. This is anything. You will scrub my floors and manage my bubble wrap. You will not have contact with my clients. You will be seen by my employees, and you will be utterly humble. It was a deliberate, calculated act of humiliation. I knew how much she valued appearances, how much she reveled in her status. Forcing her to the bottom rung, where she had to earn her existence by sweat and honest toil, was the only justice I truly cared about. She hesitated, her pride battling her desperation. But the fear of the streets won. She slowly reached for the pen. I accept. Thank you, Grace. Don't thank me, I corrected her coldly. Thank the fact that I am a pragmatist. I don't want the vergonha, shame, of having my sister homeless in my city. You sign this, you start tomorrow. She signed, her hand trembling. The contract was a legal document detailing the terms of her 6-month rehabilitation. The next day, she showed up at the gallery precisely at 8 a.m. She looked tired but presentable. I introduced her to my manager, Mrs. Eleanor Davies, simply as Claire, our new inventory assistant, ensuring no one knew she was my sister. Her first 2 weeks were miserable. She was slow, clumsy, and the physical labor clearly exhausted her. She frequently had to wipe sweat from her brow, a far cry from the immaculate woman who had once lounged on my Italian leather sofa. Then came the incident. I was in my office when I heard a sickening crash from the stockroom. I walked in to find a priceless Ming Dynasty replica vase, a decorative piece, but worth a significant amount, smashed on the concrete floor. Claire was standing over it, her eyes wide, but with a strange, defiant look in them, a look of silent, childish revolt. She had knocked it over while moving a stack of boxes. It was an accident, she stammered, though her eyes suggested it was anything but. It was a tantrum, a desperate attempt to reclaim some control by destroying something beautiful. I looked from the expensive ceramic shards to her face. My manager, Mrs. Davies, was already hovering aghast. Claire, I said, my voice dangerously soft. That vase was valued at $4,000. She paled. Grace, I don't have $4,000. Please don't fire me. I have nowhere to go. She was close to crying again. I dismissed Mrs. Davies with a look, then turned back to Claire. You are correct. You don't have the money. And I am not firing you. I watched the relief flood her face, then I delivered the cold, hard blow. You will pay for this vase, Claire. Every single cent of the $4,000. It will be deducted from your minimum wage paycheck, plus interest, until the debt is paid. You may take 18 months. Every time you pick up a paycheck, it will be a reminder of the value of carelessness. And let me make this perfectly clear. I will not accept a resignation. I stared her down. You will not quit. You will earn your way out of this ruin. Now clean up this mess. Carefully. Her act of defiance had backfired spectacularly. She was now chained to the work, not by gratitude but by debt. She had to stay, she had to work, and she had to face me every single day. The true rehabilitation had begun. The debt of the broken vase changed everything. It replaced the brittle pride Claire still harbored with a quiet, grinding determination. She couldn't afford to be clumsy, rude, or lazy. She had to work, and she had to be meticulous. Months bled into a year. The early arrogance, the desperate attempts to elicit pity, all faded into a quiet professionalism. Claire was a surprisingly fast learner when motivated by necessity. She became the most efficient inventory manager the gallery had ever seen. She learned the stock, remembered the obscure locations of supplies, and always had the gallery sparkling before opening. Her presence was a bizarre, constant echo in my life, a 10-year-long reminder of my ultimate victory. Every morning, I would see her in the stockroom, dusting the frames, her back to me, and I would reflect that the woman who had stolen my husband was now cleaning my floors. The feeling was no longer sharp vengeance. It was a cool, abiding satisfaction. I watched her subtly. I noticed she had started volunteering at a local soup kitchen on Sundays. She had stopped trying to talk to me about the past, confining our interactions to brief, efficient professional exchanges. She had truly been humbled. I realized that the true flavor of justice wasn't the fiery, immediate, public shaming I once fantasized about. It was the slow, silent, and complete internal reconstruction of a person. Claire was paying for her TRAI with Tildo not with money, but with the rebuilding of her own character, piece by painful piece. David had stolen everything from her, including her delusion, and now I was simply giving her the tools to recover her integrity. My heart hadn't softened enough to call her sister again. The trust was too broken, the cut too deep. But I began to see the woman I grew up with, the smart, organized girl who was always insecure beneath her flash, emerging from the wreckage of the trophy wife. I called her into my office just after she'd paid off half the vase debt. "Your work has been exemplary, Claire," I said, without emotion. "Mrs. Davies is retiring next month. I need a new assistant manager for sales and gallery logistics. The salary is appropriate, and you'll be dealing directly with clients." Claire looked stunned, tears welling up in her eyes. "Grace, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Say yes or no. You'll move out of the warehouse apartment and into a real place. You'll wear tailored clothes and represent the gallery. You'll be visible. No more stockroom." She accepted, of course. It was a lifeline back to respectability, a testament to her hard work. I knew the promotion was risky, but I felt she had earned the right to try. I needed to see if the rebuilding was truly complete. I still maintained my emotional distance, though. She was an employee and associate, not a sister. She knew the boundaries. David had not only stolen my husband, he had irrevocably stolen my sister, and that was the loss I was still struggling to accept. Then came the anniversary, the 10-year mark since I had been kicked out. I was locking up the gallery when I heard a faint, familiar sound from the stockroom, a broken, controlled crying. I walked quietly to the door and peered in. Claire was sitting on an overturned crate, holding a canvas I had kept stored there. The painting I called The Ejection, the chaotic vortex of pain I created in the Idaho Motel, Chapter 2. It was the painting that started my financial recovery, and it was still raw, still ugly. She wasn't sobbing wildly. She was silent, her face wet. When she finally looked up and saw me, her eyes were full of a genuine sorrow I hadn't seen before. She didn't try to justify, didn't try to explain her presence. She simply held up the painting and whispered the one thing I needed to hear, 10 years too late. "I understand now, Grace. Not just the pain of losing David or the money. I understand this." She tapped the canvas gently. "It wasn't about the money or the man. It was about you. I tore your world apart because I was jealous of your quiet strength, and I convinced myself you were weak. I am so sorry, Grace. Truly sorry." The apology felt real, earned by a year of scrubbing floors and paying off debts. But the hole they left in my life was still there. "Get some rest, Claire," I said, my voice still detached, yet carrying a faint resonance of acknowledgement. "The gallery opens at 10 tomorrow." I left her there, knowing that the apology was the climax of her journey, but the decision of what to do next was the final step of mine. The next day, I didn't wait until closing time. I called Claire into my office at 2 p.m. She walked in, poised and professional in her new tailored suit, but her eyes held a fragile nervousness. She knew this was the final reckoning. "Sit down, Claire," I said. "You've been the assistant manager for 3 months. You have excelled. You have paid off the vase, and you have proven your ability to rebuild your life from nothing." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Your time at the Carter Fine Art Gallery is over. I'm letting you go." She gasped, her face draining of color. The fear of ruin resurfaced instantly. "No, Grace, please. I've been good. I've proven myself. Don't send me back to the streets." "I am not sending you back to the streets," I stated firmly, pushing a sealed envelope across the desk. "I am sending you forward. The truth is, Claire, you cannot truly rebuild your life standing in the shadow of the woman you betrayed. Every day you look at me, you are reminded of your failure. Every compliment I give you is tainted by the memory of the humiliation you caused. I cannot be your sister again. Not in this lifetime." I watched as her face shifted from terror to a grim understanding. The finality of my statement was absolute. The hole she had created between us was a permanent, immovable chasm. Forgiveness was not on the table. "You proved you could work. You proved you could earn your way," I continued. "Now, I need you to prove you can stand on your own 2 feet, miles away from my influence." I gestured to the envelope. "That is your final paycheck, along with a severance package. It is a substantial amount, enough to secure a small apartment and start your own, small business in any other city you choose. It is not an act of sisterly love. It is the final accounting. You earned the ability to re-enter the world with dignity. This is your exit fee." Claire slowly picked up the envelope, her hand trembling. She didn't look at the amount. She just clutched it. You won't ever forgive me?" she whispered, the question hanging heavy between us. Forgiveness is a gift I give myself, Claire, and I've chosen to keep it for now, I replied, my voice steady. But I will not see you suffer. This is the end of our transaction. Don't come back to Savannah. Don't contact me again. Live well, live honestly, and build a life that's actually yours. She finally nodded, tears welling up, but she didn't cry wildly this time. The tears were those of acceptance. I understand, Grace. Thank you. For the opportunity. And for the lesson. She stood up, gave a small, formal bow of her head, and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The traitor was gone. I sat alone in my quiet office. The silence more profound than ever. The justice was complete. Claire was saved from ruin, but at the cost of the familial bond. The secrets were all revealed, the debts paid, the power inverted. My manager, Mrs. Davies, came in a few minutes later, looking concerned. Is everything all right, Grace? Did Claire take the news badly? I smiled, a thin, private smile. Everything is perfectly all right, Eleanor. The account has been settled. I walked over to the closet where I kept the painting, the ejection, safely stored. I brought it out, setting it against the wall, looking at the ugly, painful colors I had created 10 years ago. I picked up the framed photograph of David and Claire on the yacht, the one the acquaintance had sent, which I had kept hidden in a drawer all these years. I looked at their smug, oblivious faces, and then at the painting of my pain. I put the photograph in the shredder. It disappeared with a quiet, satisfying whine. I turn now to you, the audience, and shut down any further discussion about what happened next. I was betrayed, but I was not destroyed. David was a fool, and Claire was a victim of her own greed. The life they stole was worthless. The life I built is priceless. Life demanded payment from the wicked, and the wicked paid their debt. But the final gift, the gift of absolution, is something I decided to keep for myself. And that truly is the end of the story. I was kicked out, but I was finally free.